Hello and welcome to the Diversity Show brought to you by the Town of East Hampton Anti-Bias Task Force. My name is Andrew Visconti, your host today, and I am here with Tom Flight, our guest today. He is the council member.
Correct.
And has been a council member for the past, 4 months or so, 5 months?
3.5 months, yeah.
But who's counting, right?
Exactly.
But today we're really here to get to meet Tom in his role as one of the members of the Anti-Bias Task Force. But before we get to that, I would like to get to know you a little bit. We've never met before. It's a pleasure to meet you. And first of all, charming accent. We'll get to that in a moment. But first of all, Flight. That's an interesting last name. What was it like to grow up with that last name?
You know, it's funny. I love to travel. It's my guilty weakness. And it's like I've often gone to airports and be like, really, that's your last name? You know, so no, it originates from Scotland. Yeah, it's like my dad kind of traced it all the way back up to northern Scotland, and then he did the ancestry DNA test and kind of found it went back to Vikings. So it's somewhere from there. It kind of came down and ended up in London, England.
Oh, great. Well, we'll get back to Scotland in a moment. In the couple of minutes we had before we started the show today, you mentioned something that I didn't know. You were born in Mumbai?
I was, yes. Back then known as Bombay. My parents were both working over there. And so I just, by happenstance, happened to be born there and lived there for about a year when I was born. I then went back to the UK, grew up in London. But then when I finished university, I had some time off and I went to teach back in India again in Ajmer and Rajasthan for a year, which was a fascinating time.
What did you teach?
English, math, geography, and I tried teaching some of the kind of more interested students some French because I happen to speak French as well.
So what was that experience like?
Oh, it was absolutely unbelievable. I think it's one of the great things about travel. Even if you do it regionally, you just get to see things from a different perspective. Concepts of poverty, where you might exist one way, but then you travel to a different country and you'll see poverty in a whole different light. What people find enjoyment in is very different from place to place. So, when I was there, I kind of was largely based in Rajasthan, which is a desert area. But then I spent some time traveling up in the north. I went up to Dharamsala and McLeod where the Tibetans are in exile. Seeing that as a young man was, very informative to me. And then, you travel through India itself. You're aware of the caste system they have there. So just kind of seeing that and understanding that, the different religious tensions they have. It's a vast country, both geographically and population-wise. It was just an amazing way to learn.
So you were there around, 23, 24, around that age?
Yeah.
Okay. What is one event that comes to mind that happened during your year or time you spent in India that will always stay with you?
It's a great question. There's an area in the north of India called Manali in Himachal Pradesh. It's right in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I distinctly remember taking a bus ride up there. And the Indian buses, we've all seen the images of them with people sitting on the roof and they're a little ramshackle. They're wonderful machines, but the mountain roads there are like nothing I'd ever seen before. And there was a crazy rainstorm going on. We're driving around these mountain roads, kind of the foothills of the Himalayas. I mean, it will stay with me for the rest of my life. How we made it to the destination, I don't know, but we did. These guys do it on a daily basis, but I'll always remember that. The sheer beauty of the place as well. It's wonderful.
You have 3 children. Are you planning on taking them to India anytime soon?
You know what? I'd love to. I still have my Indian family, so I'm fortunate to have a Sikh godfather. And so I have a lot of kind of extended quasi-family members there. And I took my wife there for the first time 4 or 5 years ago, and she kind of met everybody there. My kids, I'm going to wait till my youngest son is about 18, and then I kind of want to kind of get everybody together and meet and just, introduce my children to kind of my extended quasi-family over there.
You mentioned your Sikh family there. Let's not take for granted that viewers know about Sikhs.
Of course. So Sikhism is a religion that kind of comes from the northwest of India. Distinctly, people might recognize that part of the religion is that the males do not cut their hair, so many of them wear turbans and have these wonderful beards and mustaches. It's a wonderful group of people. The different religions in India are absolutely fascinating. I mean, the number of gods, how they kind of envision life and nature is very different from much of the West. You have three kind of main religions there, really. Four, I apologize. You have Hinduism, you have Islam, you have Buddhism and Sikhism. And I apologize because I will be forgetting others, of course. Those are the four predominant ones. But just the diversity there is so interesting, the history that goes with it as well. So if you go to Delhi and you see Qutb Minar, the ancient iron pillar going back thousands of years, you can go to Agra and see the Taj Mahal built by a concubine for her emperor. Just absolutely unbelievable place in history.
Well, it sounds like India is a lot more than just the word Mumbai on your passport for you.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a huge part of my life growing up. My father and my godfather became best friends when they lived there. So always going back and forth, seeing each other. The children became very close friends. It's growing up in London too. There's a very big Indian population in London as well. I mean, the national food of the UK is curry. Thank goodness, because English food's notorious otherwise.
I thought it was fish and chips.
Fish and chips is very good too. Yeah, no. India is a massive part of my kind of psyche and my makeup. I dearly, dearly love it as a place, and I think the people there are wonderful.
Now tell us about growing up in London.
It was absolutely amazing. I was fortunate. I grew up very close to the River Thames in London, in an area called Putney, which is a kind of a leafy suburb area. So a lot of outdoor space for me, a lot of parks. London's a very cleverly designed city. You can almost cross the entire city through its park system. So, I'm someone who thinks being outdoors in nature is very important to your well-being. And so having that growing up to be outdoors was great. I had a lovely time growing up there. It was a very interesting time. As I was coming to my formative years, it was really kind of when Thatcher was leaving government, and you had Tony Blair coming in with New Labour. And so it was a transition from the old system to a kind of more inclusive system that took place in my formative years. Just a great fun place to grow up in, safe, very kind people on the whole, very diverse communities, much like New York, people from all over the world, just working together, and just the diversity of food, art, culture, it really just helped me see so much of the world while being in one place growing up.
I meant to ask you, in fact, if you could sort of draw a parallel between London and New York, considering that many of our viewers are familiar with New York, not necessarily with London. How do the two metropolises compare?
It's a really good question. I wish I could remember the person's name, but when I was at business school, they had someone come in to give a talk about the differences between the UK and the US. And this very intelligent lady said, you can actually almost put this down to one thing. It's vacations, which is that in the US, typical vacation time is only around 2 weeks. In the UK, it can be 8 to 12 weeks, and that's fairly similar across Europe. So people travel a lot in the UK because they have time to. In the US, by contrast, with that shorter vacation time, and a country where you have every geographical element available to you, people kind of tend to leave the country less, as you see with the passport ownership across the country. I would say the other kind of thing related to that is that New York's pace is much faster. It's much more intense. The UK is more of a socialist system, so government involvement is definitively more there. It tends to be somewhat more bureaucratic in nature. New York is more entrepreneurial by contrast. There's always people starting up new, different businesses, which I love. By the time I kind of left the US at age 24, sorry, the UK at age 24, I got pretty frustrated by the bureaucratic side. I kind of wanted to explore the world, and I'd been fortunate to meet my wife a few years before that, and so we came to New York, and we spent a year living there. New York's a funny place to live. I'll say that.
Funny?
Yeah, funny. It's tough. The first time I moved there, I had an interesting job. I was working actually for an Indian company, bringing in an Indian beer called Cobra Beer. And I had a year doing that. And, my wife was working as an editor for a writer at Vanity Fair. And, we were here, there, and everywhere, but not really enjoying it. And so believe it or not, we put everything into the back of our station wagon. We drove cross country, and we decided to move to San Francisco on a whim. And we did, and we lived there for 5 years, and I absolutely loved living there. It was a great place to live.
Remind me to go back to your San Francisco experience in a moment. First, I would like to go from London to Scotland. You studied in Edinburgh?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you started business school, you just mentioned?
Yeah, I did. Edinburgh, I did my undergraduate and master's in geography, and business school. I went to University of Cambridge in England. Living in Edinburgh, I lived up there for 4 years. It's a wonderful city. The old kind of myth of Scotland is if the weather was good, it would be the most populated place in the world. But the weather is really not good at all. But there's that old adage: there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing choices. You learn that fairly quickly up there. It was a wonderful time in my life. My closest friends are actually still my old college roommates from there. I actually just met up with a few of them in South Africa last month. Just some very bright young people, a very cosmopolitan city, not as big as London or New York, as you can imagine. So you had the access to the Scottish countryside within a 10, 15-minute drive, which was just stunning. Really, I'm an avid hiker, and that's where my love of hiking really started up in Scotland.
Great. So, Mumbai, London, Edinburgh, Cambridge, then New York.
Then New York, exactly.
And New York, cross country, San Francisco. How long did it take you to go cross country from New York to San Francisco?
That was the second time I'd driven it. Just about 10 days we did it in. We were eager to get there, and we were young and on a pretty fixed budget. So, we wanted to do it fairly quickly, but that time we actually moved there. We did the southern route. We went down to Florida and across the south, which was lovely. We had friends in different places we stayed with. We stayed in some hotels, some nice, some not nice, but got to see a huge part of the country. I mean, America is just massive. People outside the US really don't understand that. One thing I always say to my British friends is that if you look at New York State, it's around 46,000 square miles. England is 90,000 square miles. So, the state is almost half the size of England. I mean, so it's huge. And New York's nowhere nearly the biggest state. So just seeing how people live across the US, seeing what they do for enjoyment, seeing what's working, what's not working, that's something I've always loved about travel.
Right. Speaking of your experience going cross country, as we all know, we are living through a very divided political moment right now. But perhaps people are not as divided as they are. And I wonder what your experience was just meeting average Americans from not from New York State, not from New Jersey, but from the big open states of the West. What was that experience like, and what do you remember about it?
I will say that 99% of people I've met in this country are delightful. That they're warm, they're open, they're kind, they're helpful. And I would include New York and New Jersey in that too. I know we have this reputation on the East Coast for being a little bit more brusque, but I think that's slightly exaggerated. Wherever I've kind of really been across the US, I've found that, people have been interested to hear about me and where I'm from. I think my accent always creates some conversation. But they're also interested to tell me about their lives. My wife has a lot of family from Western New York, out by the Wellsville area, which is a fascinating part of the country. It's kind of the Wild East in a way. It's a big oil country up there. And going up there and meeting all the people up there, just again, just so kind and welcoming, going in for dinners and meals and just, just learning about life up there. Going back to your point about division, I think it is there. I think it's, unfortunately, it's something that we know is taught. I mean, yeah, we're simultaneously different and same at the same time. And, how we react to those differences is what is key. And my experience is that on the whole, when I've met people, the reaction has been really positive. I think in the cases where we're seeing less positive reactions and more biases, it's something that somehow has been educated or instilled in people. And it's really important on governments and organizations like the Anti-Bias Task Force to address those divisions and kind of point out, the falsities in a lot of the arguments and, really refocus people on the sameness. And where there is difference, to celebrate it, not have a bias about it, kind of understand that the differences are what make us and what make this country so amazing.
If you think about those 10 days across the US, is there one person that stayed with you?
Yes. It's a family friend who sadly passed away many years ago called Debbie O'Hara, who was just the kindest, sweetest person. She lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. She was a friend of my wife's mother. They grew up together in Wellsville that I was talking about earlier. And we got there, and she was just the most remarkably kind person. Also, as she admitted herself, she was the worst cook you've ever met. She served us chicken that was as hard as stone, and we laughed about it endlessly. Her kindness is something I tried to replicate, but she forever is in my memory.
So after this tour of the world that we just did in the past 20 minutes, let's get to the Anti-Bias Task Force.
Sure.
What are you bringing to the Anti-Bias Task Force based on this international experience that you accumulated over the years?
It's a really good question, and I'm gonna be a little careful how I answer because my role is as liaison. So we put together the task force, and I listen to what the committee kind of comes up with, and then I will go to the town board, addressing issues that they may be raising and looking to create legislation or other changes in town operations to address those issues. Specifically from my perspective, what I hope I bring is that I'm very open-minded. I try to be very inclusive. I think one of the things I pride myself on, it's come from a different part of my life actually, is I try to be incredibly empathetic. I think, understanding how and why other people are behaving as they are, or maybe saying things they are, really kind of taking the time to listen and understand, I think is a skill set that, I like to believe that I do a good job at bringing into those situations.
What would you say is a big challenge in the town of East Hampton in terms of inclusiveness? Here we are, a show called The Diversity Show. What is the diversity in our community, and what are the challenges?
Well, one thing I'm going to say, and it's again 3 months into my job, it's an election year, and just looking through the history of this task force as a whole, it's rare that the task force has actually issued any public statements in the past. They do a lot of work in the background, but the 2 times they have in recent years are 2024 and 2016. In 2016, you may recall we had KKK flyers going throughout the town, a lot of kind of white supremacy messaging going on. In 2020, we had the terrible riots of January 6th. Elections are not good years for inclusiveness. They're not good years for celebrating our differences. We find that politicians will use ways to separate us and make us different and compete against each other to vote. I think, that's the key goal for the task force this year, is to kind of really try to create as many events as possible, as much messaging as possible to celebrate our differences, because that is one of the greatest things about this community. And I apologize because I've forgotten the first part of your question, so please.
But allow me to try to ask a slightly provocative
Of course.
question. I am part of an organization that helps the Latino community learn English. So obviously, I am very responsive to their needs. That said, it's amazing how many Latinos are now in our area. And sometimes I wonder, is this going to cause a problem with non-Latinos who feel that there's too many Latinos now?
I think it's interesting. My wife teaches at the high school, and she went to high school here. And you look at the high school population as kind of a marker of what is the makeup of the community as a whole. And I'd say probably 50% or more of our population is Latina out here. And I think when she was at school here, she estimated maybe about 40%. So definitively it's grown, but it's always been a huge part of our culture. The differences, I personally think they're wonderful. I mean, I'm from the UK, so soccer is huge in my heart. And, there's an amazing soccer program run out here by Michael Tamay. I don't know if you ever met him. He's a wonderful young man. So again, it's finding ways for us to join together. Will there be cultural differences? Yes. I don't think they're things that need to be isolated. I think they're things that need to be celebrated. I think they're changes that, are coming in the US. One of my other committees that we were talking about earlier is human services. It was a very interesting talk I was listening to recently about the changing demographics of the US and the Northeast as a whole. And one of the things we're seeing here is that we are projected to have a very fast aging population in the US. Very similar to what we've seen in Japan historically, where low fertility rates, people choosing to have children later for financial difficulties and other reasons, and people living a lot longer. Where the population growth is occurring is a lot of it's coming from migration. A lot of it's coming from migration from Latin America and elsewhere. And that's just a fact. These numbers are there. And for me, that's something to celebrate. I mean, we are all people. We all bring something different to the table. You may be Latino, Latina, and you can be very different from someone else who's Latino, Latina. It's finding what brings us together is the key. And that's something that I think is critical for the Anti-Bias Task Force to do. Going back to Group of 27, which is the organization you're referring to earlier, it's a wonderful organization. Personally speaking, I would love to see something similar out there for people who don't speak Spanish to start to learn Spanish as well. When I was on the Montauk School Board, it's a very small school district, and we looked at Southampton, where they've been able to introduce bilingual education there. And, to do that in a school the size of Montauk would have required an entire shadow staff, which we just don't have the budget for, especially with things like the 2% budget cap. So we looked at it and we analyzed it, and we were able to bring someone in to do bilingual lessons from pre-K through to 4th grade, because educationally we've identified that that is the critical age to kind of start getting people speaking both languages, which is a huge win. And actually the person who we brought in to do that is now on the Anti-Bias Task Force Committee, Rosanna McGinty-Solaris, who's a wonderful person. But I think finding ways for us to communicate better, to interact better, those are the goals we kind of have to really look for.
Do you feel you're a foreigner here?
It's a really good question. I never feel like I'm a foreigner anywhere. And it's something my family say about me. You can take me to pretty much any country and anywhere, and I just tend to try and fit in. I try to be as adaptable as possible. I will eat anything you put in front of me. I will try and speak any language where I'm at, albeit badly. I grew up in England, and as I said, size-wise, it's a small place, and very close by you have France, where the language is very different. But my best friend growing up was French, and so every summer I would go and stay with him and his grandmother, and her only insistence was, well, if you're living with me, you have to speak French. So from the age of 7, I just had to start speaking French, and and that's the key to it, is that, do I feel like a foreigner? We can all feel like a foreigner, but it's on us to kind of, adapt where you can, and try and embrace, things that you enjoy in your community and support them. When I moved to Montauk, I wasn't originally a citizen. I had a green card from marrying my wife. But then as my kids got older and they were going into the school system, I was like, oh, I really want to be able to kind of get more involved with the school. And, I was on the scene when I was traveling once of a terrible accident. And I tried to help the person who was injured as much as possible, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And I decided there that, no, I want to learn how to do this. So the best way to do that, I found out, was to become an EMT. And at the time, to do that, you had to join the fire department. You had to be a citizen to join the fire department. And so I took my citizenship test. It's something I took very seriously. And talking of being a foreigner, like every time I stand up and I make the pledge, it means a huge amount to me.
Wow.
I take it very, very seriously. To swear allegiance to a different flag, you have to really take that seriously. So I don't feel like a foreigner. I kind of have adapted to being here, and it's something that I think you have to do. Place is hugely important.
Thank you. This is absolutely fascinating. Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for talking to our viewers and telling them about yourself.
Andrew, thank you very much for your time today. Cheers.